So all right, now let's move on to our next session of the day, that is open source software security in financial services. Why should it matter to you? And the moderator for this session is Julian Gordon, VP Asia Pacific, Hyperledger, Linux Foundation, APAC. And joining Julian on this panel are Ajay Singh, CIO, DLT Labs, Arjun Vashishth, CEO, Paytel, Edgar Diaz, Regional Vice President, Channels, Asia Pacific, China, and Japan, F5. So I would request all the panelists to please come on the stage. Hi. Oh. And who are we missing? We have him, yeah. Hi. Please welcome our panelists with an applause. So over to you, Julian.
Okay, thank you.
It's working.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
You can. All right. Welcome, everyone, to this, I think, one of the second from last penultimate panel, which is always the best panel, by the way, at any of these events. And today we're talking about open source software security in financial services. Why does it matter to you? So, and I've got a great panel here today, and I think what we'll do is we'll get them to introduce themselves. So maybe starting with Ajay.
Hello everyone. I'm honored to be here. So I'm co-founder and CIO of DLT Labs. At DLT Labs, we are building business enabler products which are on top of blockchain with a philosophy that business can only succeed or our organization can only be successful if they are seamlessly able to collaborate with other organizations. And from collaboration point of view, we talk about business collaborations, how they share their business network, how they share their business rails. And for us, security is one of the very important aspects because blockchain inherently brings a lot of security to it, and we will dive deeper today on those aspects.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Arjun Vashishth. I'm the founder CEO of Paytel. So we at Paytel, we are providing financial services to the rural part of India through our portal, through our retail network, working as a correspondent to the banks. So we are also working on multiple financial services on the tech side. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Edgar Diaz, and I am the Vice President for Channels and Alliances for F5. If any one of you, how many of you have heard of F5? Okay, already. Okay, so F5 is the leading application security load balancing company in the world. 90% of the top 500 companies in the world run on F5 for load balancing, for traffic management, etc., etc. And you might wonder, what is F5 doing on an open source, stage here? Around 2 years back, we acquired a company called Nginx, which is the world's largest, from a market share standpoint in open source from a web server standpoint. Because we saw the fact that there is a huge shift that is happening from a modern application standpoint, and that's the reason why we've actually gone ahead and acquired Nginx. So we can talk more on this session. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. And what a great panel, right? So I'm going to go through just quickly a presentation for about 5 or 6 minutes to kind of give you a kind of understanding of why we're talking about open source and why it is an important subject for us to talk about. So if I can get someone with a magic wand who does the presentations, thank you, and then we can go through it. Do I need to have a pointer, by the way? Okay, excellent, that's coming. So actually, I'm going to talk about open source as really being the core for innovation. So all of you today have your mobile devices, you have a data center. A majority of that software is now open source. companies like I work for Hyperledger, which is a blockchain technology, blockchain foundation, and we develop some of the most successful open source blockchain technologies, and that is developed by multiple companies. We have about 200 members, and there's thousands and thousands of people developing open source, developing that core technology together in such a way that a proprietary technology couldn't do it. Okay? And by the way, open source is unleashing the power of fintech. It's true. I like that's that banner, but we're doing that, right? So here is just a little bit about where open source is today. So I think they went back one. Okay, I'll take you forward. There you are. So we have about 40 million open source components are available today. So those are used for there's many big, like Linux, which is 70-90% of the world's compute. Things like Kubernetes, which is one of the largest orchestrating tools. Some of the big projects, as well as many people, developers will use just components for reusability of code. So and that is moving from 40 million to 420 million by 2026, and we have over 2 trillion downloads a year. So it's enormous, very, very large in terms of, and it's driving innovation. It's accelerating innovation. So accelerating all the technology that you use, underpinning what you do in terms of cloud, in terms of metaverse, in terms of Web3, and all that is mainly developed in open source technology because it's the fastest way. It's always faster for a collaboration than one specific individual company's IT department. And today, when you have a modern application code, 90% of any application that's modern application is generally 90% of it is. Even a lot of proprietary has open source in it. So that is enormous. And then 10% will be proprietary, and that's your own kind of sizzle on it. But it's a very, very large part of any open source, any software today, application. But guess what? We have a challenge. We have a cybersecurity challenge. It's not just open source software, but it's also in terms of proprietary software. We're having an increase in the number of hacks, vulnerabilities being exposed, and we all know that, right? And as the world turns into software, famously they say the world is software is eating the world. Your car is a piece of software. Your phone is, I used to know records, Spotify. Everything is turning into software, and we're all going to the metaverse, which is software, right? So most of what we're going to rely on, our critical infrastructure, is going to be is open source software. So we, as a community, want to make sure that it's as secure as possible. So why now? I think I explained. It's center stage of software development, and software is being used by the world today to do all the things that we want to do. All these fintech things is all about software, right? Underneath, security is critical. Adversaries are winning. It's getting tougher out there, and governments demand action. And I work for the Open Source Security Foundation. It actually literally came out of an executive order from the White House to help pull the community together, and we work with them to create this foundation, which is a global foundation to help pull together the community to make open source software more secure. So this is our organization. We have a short amount of time, so I'm not going to go through this, but basically we're helping pull together the community. We're pulling together the resources. We are the one organization helping to do that globally. This is very complex, but really just shows you, in software we talk about supply chain from developer to consumer. There's many different components that go into that. It's not just one piece of software. And we have, you can't see it here, I think below, we have all these working groups. So we're working groups on better, improving best practices, looking at vulnerabilities, security tooling, special initiative funds, special integrity. And anybody can join. This is an open community. We have working groups working on this globally. And we actually work with in the US with a kind of global modernization plan, which we're looking to raise about 150 million to help drive this. So this is a big, big activity. And the companies that are helping us do that, some of the largest technology companies in the world, and some of the, I know Coinbase up there, which is obviously a cryptography, a crypto exchange. We have some banks, JP Morgan Chase, we have Google, we have Meta, we have Red Hat, we have many companies working on this, and this has really only been going for about a year, and it's accelerating. And we have Wipro here in India. And I'm going to notice the nicest brand here is this thing called F5, which is nicely positioned there. So obviously we seated in there because it was next to F5, right? And we have all these great companies involved, and we're looking, I think, in India to get more and more companies involved because India is one of the software capitals of the world, right? A lot of the development of global companies is developed here in Bangalore, in Hyderabad, all around India. So when people develop software, open source software, we want to make sure they think about securities. We're going to help them with best practices. We're going to help them with all the components to make better software. So with that, I'm now going to turn to my panelists, and I'm going to ask the first question. And I think we'll start here with Ajay, and please go down the line. So what, in your view, is the state of open source software security today, and do you use open source software?
Yeah, we do use a lot of open source software. As far as the state is concerned, I will say we are doing fine. Just if we were not doing fine, I think this event would have not been possible. A lot of things which we are using in this event, probably what router is running, maybe also coming from an open source community and open source software. Things that have not yet gone to dog from last 2 days, it means we are doing fine, but can we do better? Are there chances and scope of improvement? Yeah, there are a lot of chances and there are a lot of scope of improvement, and what you just now presented around what things are happening from community perspective looks very promising. And other aspect is there's a lot of myths around open source software which needs to be dispelled with right education and proper education and knowledge sharing. Things around that. If somebody can read the code, it is unsecure. This is one of the very misnomer thing that if somebody can read the code, it becomes unsecure. In fact, if people can read the code more, it becomes more secure because it is out there in open for people to understand what can go wrong. And more the code walkthrough happens, more the code read through happens, more it passes through n number of check eyes, more better the code becomes. Other few important aspect is open source software cannot make money. That is again one of the myths because of a lot of time companies do not try to either invest in open source software or they do not try to actually put effort in open source software communities. One of the biggest example of open source software gaining money is we have F5 also here. Nginx earning a lot of near about 90% of the web servers currently run on Nginx, and for us 100% of our forward proxy, reverse proxy, and load balancing of lot are done over Nginx. The other example is Red Hat Linux. It's a commercially open source software. Red Hat Linux is doing fine, doing awesome in terms of earning revenues, in terms of earning profit. So it requires a lot of education around so that these myths these myths can be busted. People get right information. Also, all the people who are consuming open source software should understand that they are consuming it and they should start giving back to the community. They should start giving back to those software collaboration efforts, because ultimately they are a very important critical component in everybody's company who are running any type of application or any type of support service. A lot of places, without their knowledge or without their recognition, an open source software is getting used. So it is very much essential that they keep a thorough eye, a watch, and do not consider anything which is there in open source to be secure. That is also one of the counter argument which you get from people that there are a lot of things which are not secure. Same is proprietary software. There are a lot of proprietary software which are exposed to vulnerabilities and bad things can happen. So we should have an open eye. We should try to give back to the community. We should try to engage the community and with the community and collaborate with them in that particular sense.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, so I think talk about education there, understanding software, right? And I think actually a key thing is contributing back, right? Because not just consuming open source software, but communities also contributing back.
And you can make money with open source also.
You can. Yes, of course you can. It's it's the underpinning that you use for your your applications. You're working in blockchain, right? So yeah, excellent. So, Arjun, so what's your thoughts around open source and security?
I would say that everyone is using open source. Some or the other, they don't know, or they might know that they are not using open source. So, open source is that when you start using open source, that's limited to you. That's limited to you in a way that you have to customize it. Security is something that you need to customize as per your need. Everyone is using open source. We are also using open source, and we know the amount of threats that we can have and the type of security tools and everything that needs to be there in place. So it's customizable. So that's what I see. Open source is kind of, you can say, the future. And it's also very cheap. It's also very cheap.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, it's the most efficient way of doing things, right? So
yeah,
we work
it's
as a
easy to,
yeah.
you know, we can say it's also very easy for the team to work on. Yeah.
Exactly. So yeah, excellent. And actually, an interesting thing is that, you know, you say a lot of people don't know they're using open source software, right? So underpinning most of the things that you do today, your cloud infrastructure is open source. 70 to 90% of the world's compute runs on Linux, which is open source, right? The number of things, most DLT ledgers are on open source technology. It's just, most people don't know it. But it's a good thing, right? Because it means that your technology is developed rapidly. It's going to beat the, you know, that collaborative effect is always going to beat, you know, that proprietary individual kind of attempt to build software. But it doesn't mean that you can't make money out of it and build your own technology on top of it, right? It really is on the non-competitive component, right? You should compete on your functions and features rather than the core underlying software.
Right.
Yeah. Edgar, so F5 with your open source software, right? Some of the most popular there is.
Yes, yes. So I'll answer your question from two sides. F5, you know, if you look at it before 2019, we believed that we needed to own the whole stack. We needed to own the hardware. We needed to own our software. And if we owned the software and hardware, it was more feature-rich, it was better in performance, and it was more secure. And then in 2019 or 2018, 2019 is when the world went through a massive shift. If you see 2018 was when $55 billion of acquisitions happened. Red Hat got acquired by IBM, GitHub got acquired by Microsoft, F5 acquired Nginx, you know. And the fundamental thing is the feature richness that you can get in an open community is unparalleled. Now that's from an industry standpoint. If you look at it from a customer standpoint, I think from a customer standpoint, COVID changed a lot of things. COVID made people go through digital transformation. And what is digital transformation? Nothing but more and more applications that are getting adopted by customers, right? And applications is nothing but code, right? And you can't get faster code out, you know, by doing it yourself. You know, you can have a team, as Julian said, you know, India is a software hub of the world. But if I'm a fintech or if I'm a banking customer, if I want to come up with a new application, it's going to take me longer to come from scratch. And it is much faster to come in from if I adopt open source. But now the bigger question comes to security. Not only from an open source perspective, but from an application perspective. Open source had its, you know, its best friend, which was the cloud. Because you could create code, but how fast could you get it on? And the cloud was exactly that, the way to get it on faster and faster, right? Because you no more were dependent on a procurement guy to get you servers and stuff like that. So the cloud basically accelerated the entire digital transformation and code. And from F5's perspective, the way we look at it is security is absolutely critical because the data that sits behind the application has to be secure. And so we look at it as multiple tiers, whether it's infrastructure security, application security, API security, east-west traffic security. We look at all of that as a way that needs to be addressed from a security standpoint.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. So now we know how important open source is, right? And how key it is to, I think, to many of your businesses as well, right? And many businesses don't know that, right? It's the kind of silent thing that's going on in the background. So what do you see as some of the vulnerabilities that people should be aware and that are happening in open source and that you can talk about? And by the way, maybe in all software, not just open source, right? It's a common dilemma that we have today.
So I think one of the important factor is what just Edgar told about, right? Delivery, faster delivery of the product or services. And in doing so, each software component nowadays are dependent upon a lot of dependencies, packages, right? So what is happening, and the most vulnerability happens with those dependencies and packages which are not maintained, which are not versioned properly, which are not updated with current standard guidelines, which may not be following certain encryption methodology and making your data layer secure, or making you put the data in your data layer which is not encrypted in nature. So dependency management, orchestration of the products and services, deploying, those are the new vulnerability challenge which any industry is going into, or especially if you are developing something on web, because the solution itself requires a lot of collaboration from a lot of different moving pieces, and nobody is actually trying to have a firm view upon what is happening in all those moving pieces, because a lot of software which are getting collaborated or packages are getting collaborated were not written for that particular specific purpose. It was through certain discovery or a aha moment with some developer, okay, we can reuse this, we can repurpose this. And in doing so, since that particular community may not be either in line with how you want to use it, right? You may not be using it with their standard guidelines in place. You actually expose yourself to a lot of vulnerabilities. Other very important aspect is creating a scorecard of repositories or creating a scorecard of packages which are there in open source environment and are getting used repetitively, right? In fact, the other vulnerability is just the OWASP list itself, which is maintained by open source developer and open source community, which actually tells what is vulnerable and what is not vulnerable, right? So these are very important places where any leakage can happen. And as a community, we should be trying to figure out what is the best way to collaborate and what is the best way to actually create scorecards for these open source repositories, open source packages, open source software which are present, which are getting reused very often. And the initiative should start coming from the people who are actually using it, who are using it to deliver their products, so that their products become robust. So I think dependency management and standardization in place, where how should be used, what part should be used, and in which way it should be integrated, are very important.
And I think that all kind of plays to the software supply. People don't understand the software, bundling of software dependencies, be more sophisticated in the way that you develop your software, right?
Correct. And because the speed of software delivery is depending also upon the build and SDLC cycle, right? So as the requirements are coming, you need to push it as soon as possible. And in doing so, you by default become dependent upon a lot of tools, a lot of dependency and package managers in order to, whether it's Maven, whether it's orchestration tool like Kubernetes, or whether it's containerization tool like Docker. And the security vulnerability can come on any of these areas, on any of these layers. So in doing so, things in a faster way, which is very much required, we have also increased the threat areas for ourselves. So that is why an extra check, an extra eye lookup needs to be required. Every company needs to have a little bit of security team in place, right? There needs to be a department which is dedicated to security, which is looking at their builds, which is looking at their deployments, which is continuously scanning what is there in production. A lot of time vulnerability discovery happens when things has gone live 1 year after that. And since you are not maintaining it, you are not pushing your new software products very often, and the discovery has happened late, you will not know about it. Because when you are developing, that vulnerability did not existed. I will not say did not existed, was not discovered, right? The discovery has happened late. So you need to have a constant vigilance on also the things which are already deployed, the artifacts which are already deployed. There needs to be a scanner continuously running on to make sure that things every time are in correct state.
Okay, excellent. So yeah, and it's all about best practices, and there's a lot of stuff that we're doing at OpenSF to do exactly what you're saying, right? And maybe I'll go to Edgar, and then we'll come back to Arjun to talk particularly about the fintech industry, right?
Yeah, so I think, the way we look at it is you create code, right? And security has to be embedded right at the time of code creation. And that's what we talk about, shifting left. And F5 with Nginx acquisition is actually advocating that you should build in security best practices right at the time of code creation. So that's the first thing that you got to do. The second thing is applications are never going to be sitting in one static place. They could be today sitting in AWS, tomorrow they move to Azure or GCP or Alibaba Cloud or Tencent or your on-prem data center. The key thing to do is to have a consistent security posture irrespective of where your application is. And that is one of the hardest things that happens today. Because what happens is when an application goes and sits in a particular cloud environment, you end up using native solutions that don't have certain capabilities. And you end up having a trade-off on security. So that's the second thing. And the third thing that we see from a security standpoint is there are so many threats that are coming up right now, especially from an API perspective, because APIs are unprotected. And so a lot of emphasis is being put in by next-gen fintech companies and finance companies who are exposing APIs, consuming APIs. How do I protect the application traffic that's flowing on an API? So there's a vast amount of stuff that's right now in progress from a security standpoint that we're looking at.
Okay, excellent. So Arjun, so what does that mean for the financial, as a financial tech, right, company? So what does this mean for you? How do you see it play out?
It means a lot to us because we are dealing in finance, and right now I have the same view of like Ajay and Eric have. So when the development happens, so the team needs to be aware about all the security measures right from the beginning. What threat can occur at that point, at any point of time. So they need to understand this thing. And the second thing is that they need to be updated of all the security measures. Let's say we have some standards running today, and they might get outdated tomorrow. They need to be updated enough, because this is a key feature to make your platform secure.
Yeah.
It needs to be there.
And for financial institutions, do you have to think about regulation and other things? Or
We do have regulations from the RBI. They also tell us that this needs to be done. But other than that, the companies need to be updated enough of all type of securities that are there, the tools that you need to use to make your platform secure enough.
Okay, excellent. So key for the fintech industry. So maybe I asked, maybe Ajay or Edgar answer the next question. So what are you and the open source community doing on securing the software supply chain? Okay, why don't you both do it?
Yeah, so I'll go first, right? There has been so much of public visibility when SolarWinds got hacked, right? Or when on the Log4j.
Yeah.
So it's extremely important for companies. I think you mentioned, Julian, open source is there everywhere. I've been in the networking industry for now 27 years. Interestingly, any networking product you take, every product runs open source. Inside there is a lot of open source. The internet runs on open source. Google runs on open source. Any and every entity that you have runs on open source. So the reality is you need to ensure that your code is secure. You need to have best practices. You need to have processes. You need to ensure that you patch regularly. You need to ensure that the underlying infrastructure does not have inherent vulnerabilities that tomorrow hackers can go take it, right? And vendors like ourselves, are looking at this from multiple spectrum. For example, if any one of you is here tracking the Twitter versus Elon Musk battle that's out there, right? It's on bots. Bots is a big problem, right? So for us, we've got a technology about how do you prevent bots? How do you prevent good bots versus bad bots? How do you prevent good human beings versus bad human beings? How do you do fingerprinting? How do you do threat hunting? How do you do all these kind of interesting things that will keep the bad actors out and ensure that your infrastructure, your applications irrespective of where the application resides, is secure and your data, as I think Arjun mentioned, right? The data is the gold. And especially in the financial industry, you don't see money. Money is bits and bytes, right? So you need to ensure that if your data is protected, is not hacked, because then it's reputation loss. And in a financial institution, reputation loss is, I think, far more important than anything else, right, from an overall standpoint.
So I would like to add one more thing.
Yeah, please do.
So technology should be the first, utmost priority for all the fintechs, So business is the second thing. Business can be done on an easy type. Thank you.
Yes.
So, as we are a pure blockchain product-based company, right? So blockchain took its birth from open source. So by default, we are one of the company whose product solutioning, whether proprietary products, which we have built on top of blockchain, are using a very underlying open source product. So it becomes a very much utmost for us to give back to the society, to give back to the community. So we have an open source wing within our company, which constantly try to, and it is part of their KRAs actually, to go and commit something onto the open source repository, to go and commit something onto the packages which they have seen or which they have fixed during their deployment within our product. We do constantly scanning around the blockchain technology tools which we are using or which we are building. So we have a dedicated security team around it, as well as we have a dedicated open source teams which are working for collaborating, as well as giving back to the community on open source aspects. Other aspects, in order to make sure that our products are deployed in a most secure environment, we have internalized SecDevOps to its utmost. So as Edgar told, right, the security starts from the development itself. So firstly, it starts from how secure the development environment itself. What are the things which are allowed to be used? What are the things which are not allowed to be used? Our open source team always whitelist the packages, always whitelist the repositories which they have already scanned and they feel it is secure to be used, and we have correct metrics around it. It's not that we go and developers are allowed to take anything from the open source world and integrate and do it in a delivery. We have package scanners which immediately brings out those vulnerabilities and put it as a red mark, and our software supply chain does not allow those deployments to happen. So that is how we take care around the certain aspects of security at the development stage and how it is integrated to the ops stage.
Okay, excellent. So lots of things have been done, and we're coming now to nearly to the end of this talk, and thank you everybody. But what we're doing in the OpenSSF, we have a kind of plan, global plan. We call it our mobilization plan. We're looking at how to make projects produce better code. There's kind of three areas. We're looking at how you can manage vulnerabilities and create patches, and the third one is how to roll it out. And there's a lot of a kind of drive. It's a global collaborative effort to help make sure that open source security that we all rely on globally and developed globally and collaboratively is secure and is best of class, right? Of course, there'll be different types of software, of open source communities. Some will be better than others. So many different things into there. So this is the plan, though. So I think the question the final question, right, to you all is, what about India? So how should India, as being one of the software, centers of the world, so how should India, do you think, get involved, or how can they get involved? What would be your advice on that aspect?
So I think India has largest developer community, right? So the best effort forward would be to start companies as well as at the college level. Colleges should start promoting open source contribution, and we at DLT Labs, we have a lot of college collaboration. We run Blockchain Center of Excellence with a lot of colleges. So we make sure that people are educated around it, students are educated around how much important the open source are. And since it is very difficult for somebody who is immediately diving onto the open source world, right? They require certain helping hand, where to ask something, what place to go, right? Which particular communication channel to be followed, where are the Discord channels, where are the Slack channels. So that is how we are helping out all the students within the college to actually reach out to open source community, start taking part in their developer conference call or contributors call to understand in which direction those things are going ahead. So I think we are in a fine state, but a more push is required because by default, India has the largest developer community in the world, right? And we can, what we are contributing and what we can contribute, there is a huge gap, and I think it needs to be filled.
Okay, definitely. That's great. And I think education, you're right, is key, right? Best practices. And you mentioned maintainers, and people may not know what this is, right? So it's good to communicate and get better to understand this open source community and what it's doing. So, Arjun.
So I would say that, yes, I have the same point like Ajay is there. So Ajay, India has the largest developer community. But I would say one thing that not all is educated enough to understand the security part of the open source. But yes, India is taking a step forward to understand how big the open source and how important the open source is, and also the security part. Yes, they are doing that.
And I think it's a global problem. It's not just that. Everywhere around the world, and India is one of the biggest places, so it has the biggest opportunity, really. Yeah.
There's a lot of opportunity.
Yeah. Edgar?
Okay. I think as I have the final word, I would say not only India has the largest fraternity of software developers, we've also the most vibrant set of companies, right? You just enter this room and you see the number of FinTech, there are companies that are driving innovation in product. I would say as you focus on the innovation in product, it is equally important to look at every aspect of security. Code security, infrastructure security, application security, API security, threats from every perspective. And feel free to reach out to F5. We would love to talk to you and share with you what our views on all of these aspects are. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you, Ajay, Arjun, and Edgar, for being such amazing panelists. There is a depth of knowledge, and we just scratched their knowledge today, right? And this open source security foundation is a lot bigger. We literally just dented it today. So please do get involved. OpenSSF.org is where you can find more information, or talk to some of our members like Red Hat and others, right? And find out what we're doing in this space. And thank you for listening, and thank you for being here, and take care. Thank you, everybody.